The Battle of Bint Jbeil was one of the main battles of the 2006 Lebanon War. Bint Jubayl is a major town of some 20,000 inhabitants in southern Lebanon. Although Brigadier General Gal Hirsch announced on July 25 that the Israel Defense Forces had complete control of Bint Jubayl, this statement was later discredited. In spite of 3 sustained attempts by the IDF to conquer the town, it remained in the hands of Hezbollah until the end of the war. The town was the scene of some of the fiercest fighting of the war, with both sides taking heavy losses. 2 senior Israeli officers, including Major War Klein, were killed in the battle. Hezbollah similarly lost several commanders, most notably Khalid Bazi, commander of the Bint Jubayl area. Background: Bint Jubayl was a major center for the Lebanese resistance during the 18 years of Israeli occupation. Following Israel's withdrawal from Bint Jubayl in 2000, the town became an important base for Hezbollah. Hezbollah Secretary General Saeed Hassan Nasrallah held his victory speech in Bint Jubayl after the Israeli withdrawal, in front of a joyful audience of more than 100,000 people, Muslims and Christians, where he belittled Israeli power. Barak is today calling on Lebanon to consider the withdrawal as a token of peace. This is treachery. He left having no other option. Barak still holds our prisoners in his jails, occupies territory dear to us, namely the Shia farms. Every prisoner in Israeli jails will soon, God willing, be back home among you. Barak and his government have no choice. I advise him to leave the Shia farms. He has no other choice. I tell you, the Israel that owns nuclear weapons and has the strongest air force in the region is weaker than a spider's web, according to Israeli journalist Amir Rappaport. This speech infuriated the IDF command, which over time developed a cobwebs complex. The 2006 Lebanon War finally presented an opportunity to get even. Senior IDF officers, such as Chief of Staff Dan Halutz and Chief of Operations Gadi Eisenkot, claimed that Bint Jubayl was an important symbol. They hoped to capture the town and bring an Israeli leader to hold a victory speech at the same place where Nasrallah held his speech in 2000. Instead, according to Rappaport, Bint Jubayl would come to symbolize failure. According to IDF estimates, Bint Jubayl and the nearby village of was defended by 100 to 140 fighters, about 60 of whom belonged to the local garrison and around 40 belonged to the Hezbollah Special Force. The primary aim of the Hezbollah forces in the string of positions along the border was not to hold territory but to bleed the Israelis and slow down their advance. Operation Webs of Steel 2. Initially, Israel had no intention to capture Bint Jubayl. Rather, the IDF sought to control the city from outside. Brigadier General Shuki Shatrur, the Northern Command's Chief of Staff, said the plan was to raid specific targets based on intelligence. Brigadier General Gal Hirsch told a Table News Network correspondent that, "We can direct precise fire at every point that is needed within the town, and bring the forces to a situation of minimum risk." However, as the war went on, the Israeli leadership changed its position on Bint Jubayl. Despite the claims of progress, there was nothing tangible to put on display to show for it, and a clear victory at Bint Jubayl could well be the watershed in the war. A Hezbollah surrender here was hoped to create a ripple effect on the other strongholds in South Lebanon. The IDF, however, was divided over exactly how to deal with the town. Some proposed an outright occupation of the town, while others a more subtle approach, surrounding it and raiding Hezbollah positions in it. Brigadier General Gal Hirsch of the 91st Division wanted to conquer Bint Jubayl, not just to raid it. It was his division headquarters that came up with the name, Operation Web of Steel. The paratroopers, however, set out too late and were ordered to hold before reaching their designated positions. Since the painful experiences of the Eagles unit at Maroun Aras, Israeli forces were not allowed to advance in daylight. The northern side of the town was intentionally left open, apparently to provide an escape route for the town's defenders. Instead, Hezbollah used the opportunity to send in reinforcements to the town. According to the orders issued by the IDF Northern Command on July 22, the IDF should not enter Bint Jbeil. The town was to be encircled but not occupied. The Israeli advance was preceded by a massive artillery bombardment. An IDF artillery officer, Lt. Col. Avi Mano, claimed that Bint Jbeil had been hit by 3,000 shells by July 25. According to the officer, IDF cannons could make direct hits on houses and cause more damage than Katyusha rockets. According to Time magazine, over 5,000 Israeli soldiers participated in the siege of Bint Jubayl by July 25, while the number of Hezbollah defenders of the town was estimated to over 100. 5 Golani soldiers were wounded by friendly fire, and 2 tanks were sent to evacuate them. The first was hit by a missile, killing the platoon commander and wounding 2 of the crewmen. The second tank, a Merkava IV, ran over a powerful remote-controlled mine and rolled over from the blast. One of the crew was killed and the commander of the 52nd Battalion, Lt. Col. Guy Kabali, as well as his deputy, was wounded. An armor-plated D9 bulldozer that attempted to rescue the casualties was forced to retreat after being hit by a missile. The wounded were finally evacuated under the cover of a smoke screen. Altogether 18 soldiers were wounded in the clashes. 5 Hezbollah fighters were also killed during the fighting. One of them, Marwan Samahat, was killed in the clashes in eastern Ainata. Another 4 fighters were killed in southern Bint Jbeil, near the Maslak Mosque. An Apache longbow attack helicopter flying support mission for ground forces at Bint Jbeil crashed on the same day on the Israeli side of the border, killing both pilots. IAF at first believed that the helicopter accidentally was hit by Israeli MLRS artillery fire. Hezbollah claimed to have shot down the helicopter. An IAF crash investigation team later said that the crash was caused by a rare technical fault. Investigators from Boeing, the helicopter's manufacturer, however, ruled out a technical fault as the cause of the crash. By the next day, the IDF had taken up positions east, west and south of Bint Jubayl and Ainata but had not yet entered the built-up areas. In spite of this, Gen. Hirsch declared victory to the press. "The town is in our control," he declared on July 25. "The work is almost completed and the terrorists are fleeing." The statement would quickly prove disastrously wrong. An Israeli soldier would later describe his feelings when hearing Hirsch's words over the radio. "While being under Saga missile attack from every direction in the town, you realize something is wrong." The soldiers of elite Golani Brigade's 51st Battalion had been dreaming of such a mission and were genuinely happy when they were told that they were going to Bint Jbeil. They set out from Avivim and after a nighttime march over the Maroon Aras Hill reached the southern outskirts of Ainata. In the early hours of the morning on July 26, the orders were suddenly changed. Now the battalion was ordered to sweep into the Bint Jbeil and conquer it. The Golani Brigade commander Col. Tamir Yedai did not leave Israeli territory but remote-controlled the battle from Kibbutz Malkiah, the civilian settlement where the Golani Brigade had established its wartime command post. Because of topographical reasons, he frequently lost contact with his men in Lebanon. Battalion Commander Lt. Col. Yanav Asor commanded the 1st Company while his deputy, Maj. Warkline, commanded the 3rd Company. The 3rd Company walked into a well-prepared ambush in the outskirts of Ainata, the town immediately to the east of Bint Jbeil. Lebanese accounts of this battle refer to it as the Battle of Ainata, as the Israeli forces had not yet entered Bint Jbeil proper. The olive grove where the clash occurred was later renamed Liberation Square. The southern section of Ainata was defended by 2 squads, Majmu'ah. A Hezbollah squad would normally include 7 to 10 fighters. platoon commander Murchavia and 2 of his men were killed immediately as they entered the olive grove surrounded by high wall. One Hezbollah unit attacked the Israeli force in the grove while a second unit fired at the reinforcements from positions in the upper stories of buildings with small arms and anti-tank rockets. Most of the soldiers from the platoon that entered the olive grove were eventually killed or wounded. The battalion's deputy commander, Major Warkline, was seriously wounded when he reportedly covered a hand grenade with his body to save his troops. The only soldier who witnessed the episode, Sergeant Shimon Adaga, was killed shortly afterward. Klein was later killed by a second grenade. Then the company commander was injured and his deputy was killed. Lt. Itamar Katz, who did not know the names of his men, took over command. 25 immobile wounded lay in the orchard screaming for help. The men were defended for several hours almost single-handed by a lone fighter, Shia Amzili. The 51st Battalion seemed to be on the verge of breaking. The battalion did not break, but the fighting changed drastically from an offensive military operation to a rescue mission. The IDF sent in reinforcements to provide covering fire while the casualties were evacuated. The troops that arrived as reinforcements suffered lower casualties compared to the first wave. Soldiers often risked their lives not only to save the wounded, but to recover the dead and prevent Hezbollah fighters from reaching their bodies. Combat continued for several hours, and was often conducted at point-blank range. The wounded were carried 3 kilometers to a place where helicopters could land under the protection of smoke grenades and heavy artillery fire, and soldiers often simultaneously shot at enemy fighters while carrying stretchers. Finally, Israeli Air Force Black Hawk helicopters managed to land under heavy fire and fly the wounded to Rambam Medical Center in Haifa. The commanders decided not to risk pilots to evacuate the dead. They were carried out under cover of darkness by a company from the Golani Brigades. 12th Battalion, the IDF suffered 8 dead, including 3 officers, and 24 wounded in the fighting in Ainata. On the same day, an anti-tank missile fired from Bint Jbeil hit a paratrooper position in nearby Maroun al-Ras and 1 officer was killed and 3 soldiers were wounded. Hezbollah also suffered casualties in the battle. The IDF released widely different estimates of the number of Hezbollah killed in the battle, from 15 or at least 20 to at least 40 or close to 50. The Lebanese daily As-Safia wrote a year later that only 4 Hezbollah fighters died in the clash in the Olive Grove, and named them as Amir Fadlallah, Ali As-Sayed, Mahmoud Karnafi and Atif al-Musawi. The following night, Israeli paratroopers infiltrated Bint Jbeil from the west and took up positions in a number of large villas in the Talat Masoud neighborhood overlooking the town. Sporadic clashes continued over the next days. The IDF claimed that the paratroopers took part in a major engagement on July 29. According to the commander of the paratroopers, the fighting began when 2 Hezbollah fighters were killed while approaching a building occupied by the paratroopers. Then, at least 7 Hezbollah cells attacked the soldiers, employing anti-tank rockets and RPGs. The paratroopers repulsed the attack, and received air support during the battle. The paratrooper commander claimed that, "Our forces were well prepared and gunned down cell after cell. We saw them falling." The IDF claimed that 20 or 26 Hezbollah fighters were killed, and put its own casualties at 6 wounded, one of them seriously. Lebanese accounts of the battle do not mention this clash and do not confirm any Hezbollah casualties in Bint Jbeil on this date. Lebanese daily As-Safia reported that a Hezbollah reconnaissance squad attacked IDF positions in Talat Masoud on July 28, prompting an overnight Israeli withdrawal from the district. Also on July 29, 2 Hezbollah commanders and a 3rd fighter who was accompanying them were killed in an Israeli airstrike in the old city of Bint Jbeil. The house they were occupying collapsed after being bombed, killing all three of them. The two commanders were identified as Khalid Bazi and Mohammed Abu Taam. Bazi was chief of operations in the Bint Jbeil area, including Maroun al-Ras, Ainata, Itaraun and Bint Jbeil, while Abu Taam was responsible for the town itself. Both had taken part in the abduction of the two Israeli soldiers that had started the war. There are suggestions that Bazi earlier had refused to obey orders to withdraw from the town, saying that he would only leave as a martyr. Hezbollah commanders who spoke to Lebanese Al-Akhbar a year after the war did not confirm this version of events. According to them, the proper place for a commander was with his fighters on the battlefield. Bazi and Abu Taam, however, were criticized for violating military regulations by being at the same place during a battle. The IDF had earlier claimed that Bazi was killed in Maroun al-Ras several days earlier. Bazi was succeeded by Mohammed Kanser, a special force commander who in turn would be killed by an Israeli airstrike 10 days later. On the same day, the IDF pulled its troops from Bint Jubayl, but armored units continued to operate around the town. Respite. On July 30, Israel launched an airstrike on a civilian building in the town of Qana, to the north of Bint Jbeil, in which 28 Lebanese civilians were killed, including 16 children. Under American pressure, Israel declared a 2-day suspension of airstrikes on targets in southern Lebanon. Israel also agreed to allow a 24-hour window, where the United Nations could assist locals who wanted to leave southern Lebanon. Hezbollah reciprocated and suspended all its rocket attacks on northern Israel. After 19 days of continuous shelling, Bint Jubayl at last experienced a lull in the fighting. Large sections of the town had been reduced to rubble and hundreds of survivors, mainly the old and infirm who had been unable to escape from the battlefield, emerged from the ruins. A convoy of ambulances from the Lebanese Red Cross arrived at the town and began evacuating the civilians. The United Nations and Hezbollah fighters also assisted in the evacuation of civilians. The Salagandour hospital was the only hospital in the area and had been hit several times by Israeli shells. It had no fuel for its generators and was finally abandoned during the pause in the fighting. Fuat Taha, the hospital's director and only remaining physician, and the other staff helped in the evacuation of the remaining civilians before leaving the town. He had survived a direct hit on his night quarters. "We're feeling guilty leaving people behind," he said.